you guys, today we're going to be focusing on making and doing a formative for our clay unit. It's a chance for us to make sure that we really do understand the clay vocabulary before we move into our actual project. So what you will notice at the clay table is you're going to have all your tools over here, and clay will be normally positioned at the end of our table. We'll have new fresh clay for you as you work with this. The tools you also will need for this project is a rolling pin. We're going to put out some rulers for you in case you would like to use it. You're going to need a texture plate, hoop tools, and a barbecue skewer. I also have a little container of slip ready to go. All right, so there's 5 main vocabulary words that I want us to focus on. And the first one is slab. Now, when you are working at your tables, you can easily take your clay and flatten it with your hands. But if you have a rolling pin, you might as well roll it out. In this unit, when we talked about the thickness of the clay, we want to make sure that we're working with the idea and concept of Oreo cookie. Anything smaller becomes fragile, anything larger becomes really thick, and it makes it for an inconsistent drying time. All right, once you have your actual piece the thickness of an Oreo cookie, why don't you go ahead and practice using the barbecue skewer to try to cut out a shape. In this case, I'm going to just make a star. You can lightly draw into it so you can get used to the positioning. If you make a mistake, you can move on or erase it and try again, but try at this time to cut out a shape. Here's my star. My shape has a lot of clay chunks, so remember, I don't like those, and we gotta make sure that we hide them. So take out your slip or get your slip out and practicing smoothing out your edges so you have an even work space and work area. You will have about, let's give you 3 minutes to do this. Once your shape is done, I want you to go ahead and now work on to your practicing of your incising, carving, and piercing. So I worked with this idea and concept of a shape of a star. I'm going to continue doing that. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to incise an example of a star. So I am incising or drawing into my clay, making a star shape. When you're working with incisions, I do want you to be aware that clay chunks may lift up. You have to think about what is your strategy, how are you going to problem solve to get rid of those extra chunks of clay, because in your final project, I don't want to see those. So how are you going to work into it? One of the techniques that I do is I draw it into it once, try to lift out any extra pieces that I have, draw into a second time, and make sure I push down the lifted areas. I also want you to try to incise that shape. So if I have an incision of a star with my barbecue skewer, what does a carving of a star look like? I'm gonna put that here. How am I gonna make it look like that? And what's the difference between an incision and a carving? How does that look in my piece? Last but not least, the third technique is I'm going to try to then pierce a star or pierce into my piece. What does that look like? Does it add to my design or take away from my design? Okay, I'm going to give you a couple minutes to now work on your incising, carving, and piercing. Okay, so once you have your practice of your incising, carving, piercing, remember piercing goes all the way through. This is just practice time. I want to make sure that you really do understand it. So turn to your partner, make sure that you guys understand what incising, carving, and piercing looks like, and go ahead and talk to each other. Make sure that you guys are on the same page. You have about 1 minute. Okay. All right, once you guys have done that, you're ready for my next step. You probably have extra clay and your piece. What I'm going to have you do is I'm going to have you ball it up. Both pieces. We don't need this one anymore. That was just for practice anyway. Now, what I want you guys to practice doing is a technique called a pinch pot. A lot of students already know what this was, and you may have learned this at an elementary level, but if you don't know what a pinch pot is you start off with a circle, or a sphere I should say, and you take your fingers and you push your thumb into it. So I pinch and turn and pinch and turn and pinch and turn. It doesn't look like much is happening on this side, but on the inside it is starting to get hollowed out. A lot of students use this technique when they're working in their clay projects. If they wanted to make a clay mask or a clay animal, maybe this would end up being the nose or the front part of their piece. Or if you wanted to make a gnome, then maybe this would be its hat, or you can use it however you'd like, but I want you to just practice making a pinch pot. So you have 3 minutes, go ahead, make your pinch pot. All right, once you have your pinch pot, I now want you to try to take this other chunk of clay, and I'd like you to just flatten it out a little bit. Now what we're gonna do is we're gonna start working with our texture plate. So I have my clay the thickness of an Oreo cookie, and so I'm gonna take my texture plate and experiment with this a little bit. One of the things that I like about this is my clay is a little dried out. It's not super moist. When it is too wet, it is too hard to work into this texture plate. Once you have it already pre-started, then I can go ahead and roll it in multiple directions to make sure I take the texture plate. Now this is the trick that I use. I always try to hold my clay and I try to peel the plate off of it. So now you can experiment with working with different texture designs. You guys have 3 minutes, go ahead, try that. Once you have your texture plate, once you have your pinch pot, let's try to slip and score them together. This is just practice, but just keep in mind, if you're not familiar with the slip and score technique, you have to be able to scratch the surface of both pieces that you're trying to apply or put together. So if this is the case, I am making a bunch of little crisscross or intersecting lines on one side. I'm thinking about how it would fit into this other area. I know it needs to go there, so I'm gonna make my intersecting or X-like shapes or intersecting lines around here. Now, you're probably thinking, Mrs. Mohr, we have done this for years and years and years, but no matter what, it still is the #1 reason my 7th graders and 8th graders, our projects fall apart. So I want to make sure that you understand the concept. It's kind of like taking 2 pieces together of a puzzle, and when you have the grooves from one side to the other, you got to make sure that they fit together. If you put it on loosely, in the kiln process, when clay dries, it shrinks, so they would actually shrink away from each other. So what we need to do is we need to make sure that we add our slip, which is the clay and water combination. And by doing this slip, it's going to allow, and I'm going to just add a little to this side, by pushing it together, it's going to allow those 2 pieces of clay to suction together or to fit together. And the reason why I wanted you to practice this before it matters is I want you to understand that if they truly are slipped and scored together for them to work in the kiln, I should be able to take one piece and try to lightly shake it. If it stays in place, it means it's going to make it through the firing process. If you take the 2 pieces and you slip them to score them and you hold one end and they fall apart, that would not have made it through the kiln process. So making sure you have scores on each side, slip to use in between. Make sure you wiggle it just a little bit to get the air bubbles out and that the slip can suction them together. Go ahead, practice. Okay. Let's be honest, in real life, if I were to put this in the kiln, what would happen? I'm hoping you're thinking in your mind you would say that there would be an air bubble and it would break apart. You're right. If you are creating something where you want or have an air bubble inside of it, one of the tricks that you can do is you can puncture a hole on the side that you don't see, and airflow can flow in and out of it, and there will not be any breakage. So if you want to put and make a monkey and have a little monkey face and have that front part, it could, that would be the strategies you would use, is make a hole on the back side. Now, honestly, this clay, this was just a practice to make sure that you guys understand the techniques and what I want you to do for your major project. We don't need this clay anymore, so we are going to recycle it. Whenever you take clay to me or you bring me your extra clay, what you need to do is add a little water or moisture from the slip to your piece. Make sure you have it all over, or the moisture all over your piece, and then what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to then bang it so it is in the cube shape, and then you can bring it back to the bag that is sitting on the clay table like over here. And this clay then will now be perfectly rejuvenated and something that we can use for our project or our next day class. All right, you guys, you gotta make sure that you do a good cleanup at your tables. So one person washes, one person dries, work together, and make sure your table area is safe and clean for the next group of kids that come in. Good luck.